listening to The Tabletop Minimalist, a podcast about minimalism and thoughtful consumerism in the modern tabletop gaming hobby. Settle in and enjoy. Hello, welcome back to The Tabletop Minimalist. I'm Ricky and I'm here with Jamie. It's been a while, Jamie.
It certainly has. How long has it been now? Maybe a few months at the very least.
Yeah, it's been a good few months since our last recording. We've both been a little bit busy, but I trust that you're all well your end.
Absolutely. Since our last episode, when we last met, I had been in a new job, I think only a month or two, and it's been going well. That's kind of been my focus for the time being. But fortunately, during that time, I had still been able to get in some plays. So I'll be happy to share about some of those.
Awesome. Yeah, same this end really. It's been a little light on the gaming side, purely just because I've been so busy with work. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm hoping that I'll get a bit more time for some gaming. So with that, let's have a chat about some of our recent plays. Why don't you start us off? Because I've got a couple here, but I probably don't have as much as you to talk about.
It's hard to pick which one to start with because I've been very lucky and fortunate to have discovered 3 or 4 really good games, all of which I think would probably be in my top 20 list now since we last did that episode.
Oh, wow.
That being said, I think there's one game that really sticks out of the bunch. It's kind of a strange one. I guess that's kind of in theme with a lot of my taste these days, but it's a traditional 4-player card game called Slovenian Terok, or Terok. I think that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
To be honest, I really couldn't tell you how I learned about this game. I think maybe it was a random geek list here or there. So I was just out of curiosity because I think the 1 or 2 people I saw that wrote about it really remarked and commented on it as the best trick-taking game, the best traditional card game they've ever played.
Right.
So just out of curiosity, I started reading through the rules. And after reading, I was like, this might be that traditional parlor card game or parlor game that I've been looking for, that I've always been interested in trying. The thing is, though, is when I was reading it, I think like many of these traditional games, they're kind of weird. They have a lot of strange conventions, a lot of strange rules, maybe even over complicated in some places. So I was like, the bones of this game are really good, but I think it would be an interesting way to maybe scratch. I've always been interested in designing games.
Yeah.
And I thought this might be an interesting area to kind of, cut my teeth a little bit on design. So I was like, how about I try to make a variant for this game that I could introduce to my friends? So using some AI tools and my own intuition, I slowly honed it down and streamlined it to a version 1. And a few weeks ago, we got it to the table. So it was like a Friday night, and that is all we played for about 3 hours, and we had a blast. And
wow.
Without a doubt, there are still some rules and some wrinkles that we need to iron out. But the fact that we had such a good time, even just on the first play, I could really see this being a game that we play a lot in the future.
Awesome. So in terms of your own sort of version of it, what did you change? How much did you change?
I would say, based on my understanding of the game, that 80-90%, a lot of the core elements I haven't touched.
Yeah.
For example, it's a type of game maybe similar to some other traditional European games and maybe even bridge, where you're bidding on contracts, like as in you're trying to bid on some type of challenge or a condition that you're trying to achieve, and 2 or 3 of the other players are trying to prevent you from doing that. So that's kind of the dynamic. And obviously, if you bid on more challenging games or contracts, then there's more points involved. So most of that I didn't touch. I was like, that's great. But there were just some things that I wanted to play around with. For example, quite often these type of card games, the element of luck is usually quite high, and just a few other things. So I kind of just streamlined some things, some weird conventions, and that was kind of the starting point. I think I'll have more to share about it maybe after we play test it some more.
I think that's a good way to start designing, isn't it? To sort of like create your own version or make tweaks from there, because going straight into the deep end must be pretty tough. But I'm glad that was a good experience for you. I played a small handful of lighter games really recently, and the 3 are Botanicus, which, hold on, let me get the designers up. I'm always bad at this. Samuele Tabellini Ferrari and Vieri Massaini, if I've got those right. This is a sort of a light Euro style game where you're planting plants in your botanical garden and you're moving up tracks basically to get all the plants in your garden. You've got animals that you can score that score differently based on whether you remove them from your garden or not. And it uses its main mechanism is it's kind of like King Domino, where you've basically got a track of 4 options in which you can choose for your action, and the higher you go on that list will mean that you go first the next round. And people could go on top of you; they have to pay you. So you're basically not only choosing the action for the current round, but you're planning the turn order for the next round, which is a nice way of play interaction, I think, for a game that really you've got your own board and you're focusing on that, but keeping an eye on what other players might want adds a nice little flavour of player interaction in there. It's nothing too mean or take thatty, but it's interesting, I think. So there was Botanicus, which I actually really, really liked. I think this is one of the best lighter sort of style games that I've played, and it's one that I would happily come back to and play. There's a basic version and there's a more advanced version. There's different sides of the board. I'd recommend just going straight to the advanced. I mean, perhaps that's me talking as a gamer, but anyone that has, some experience in the gaming hobby should go straight to the advanced version, because there's some extra rules to do with the animals and stuff and scoring, and you get hidden scoring objectives, that kind of stuff. But it's really good, yeah. Like, not a game I'd gravitate towards, but one that I've actually really enjoyed. And for a weight of sort of 2.4, I think there's a bit of a gap, I've noticed anyway, because I've got family members that enjoy gaming but don't like to play the super heavy games. And I've always struggled to find games that are the right weight for them. And I think this is a really perfect weight for that medium light Euro style game, or it doesn't even have to be a Euro, but that style of game that both gamers and lighter players can enjoy. So that was one of them. The other two I will very quickly mention, because I think one of them ties into our topic today. One of them being Ex Libris, which is a game about organising your library of cards. I won't explain too much about it right now because I want to go into it a bit more when we talk about our topic. And the third one was Beer and Bread, which is a 2-player head-to-head game about making beer and bread. And it's kind of like a multi-use card system where you use your cards as orders, you use your cards for resources. They give you special abilities based on whether you place them under your board or not, depending on basically where you place them. It's an interesting game. It didn't set the world alight for me, but I imagine with some repeat plays, it could be something that you could get into with an opponent. And again, it's quite light. The only caveat with this one is that it is only 2 players. But 3 lighter games that I've got to the table recently.
So maybe I'll just very quickly, because I mentioned that there were, 3 or 4 very fun, exciting, and memorable plays for me. So, of course, I mentioned the Slovenian Tarak probably being the highlight. But there were 3 others that also were just great. And Ricky, I think you would probably, 2 of these, I have a suspicion that I think you would enjoy. So the first one is Equinox by Reiner Knizia.
I'm aware of this one.
So over the past year, maybe year and a half, I've really fallen down the print and play rabbit hole. In particular, a sub niche of even that really small niche, which is retheming games. So taking games and basically creating your own version of it with a different theme. And I just saw the Equinox theme with these fantastical animals, fighting each other in some forest just seemed kind of weird. So using some brainstorming, I mapped the mechanics of this game onto a theme of, let's say, finance, short selling, venture capital, startup, that entire thing. And so rather than creatures, there are startup companies that are trying to survive from seed rounds all the way to an IPO round. And I've been really in the hunt for a Reiner Knizia game that I would really like. In the past, I've tried, of course, the classic Tigris and Euphrates. I really liked Babylonia for a time. And I don't know, there's just something about his games that I just don't like. I don't know if it's just they're too mechanical or too dry. I'm not sure what, but Equinox is probably my favorite Knizia game at the moment. Probably because of 2 factors. Number one, it's really cutthroat.
Yeah.
So fortunately, the game is it's so fast. Even with 4 players, I think we played it in about 45 minutes. So it plays really fast. It's very cutthroat. It's very interactive. And the thing that I like is on top of this very minimalist, simple framework that I think belies many of Knizia's games. There's some gamey special abilities that I really like that just add an extra element of interest and variety to it.
Yeah.
So every time I've introduced it to people, we just have a great time with it. So definitely one of my new favorites. The next one is called Lowenherz. So this is a game, so of course, by Klaus Tuber, so of Catan fame. And unlike that game, which is kind of, let's just say, definitely more peaceful about trading, this one is really in your face. It's definitely a 4-player game. You're acting as, I think, princes in this big kingdom, and you're competing, trying to grow and expand your kingdoms with these ever-expanding walls. And the dynamic of this game that is so interesting and fun is that the way you take your actions is when it's your turn, you draw a card that has 3 different actions. And then simultaneously, all 4 players will bid on which action they want. So sometimes what that means is that one player will not get an action. But there's a negotiation and bribing process where if you really want an action, you can pay money to the other player who bid for the same action. It was just so much fun. So we played that game once, and immediately when we were done, we were like, let's do that again. That was awesome. And finally, so of course, I'm sure many people listening are familiar with Bonanza. I'm not sure where I heard about this. This is one of, I guess you could say, an expansion or a version of Bonanza called CC. I think it's a SISSI exclamation mark Bonanza, CC Bonanza. So this is essentially the Bonanza engine with the extra wrinkle that you need in your bean fields. You need to alternate your regular beans with these CC beans. It just adds this really interesting strategic layer. This was my first exposure to the Bonanza and that entire genre of those games, and it was awesome. I'm really bummed. I'm really kind of frustrated that I waited so long into my gaming career to try Bonanza. It's a great game.
Yeah, I've not tried Bonanza either, and I've almost picked it up a couple of times. I think it was hard to find at one point. I can't remember, but I really want to try it. I've not heard of this CC version either, but I've found it on Board Game Geek. And as for the Lowenherz, that was re-implemented by Domain, I think, which is the same game but just a newer version, I believe. I've seen this box of it before. I've not heard of the Lowenherz game. You always seem to find the hidden gems.
I'm always happy to share. I think one funny habit of mine is with my geek buddies on Board Game Geek. I like to go through the games that they rank highly, like the 10s, the 9s, and 8s. And I find that's always a fun way to discover some of these diamonds in the rough.
Yeah. On that note, any recent acquisitions that you've got over the past, 2 or 3 months, probably longer since we last recorded?
If I'm excluding some print and play projects, I would say 2 games that I actually purchased. And again, I think this is, we can touch on this in a future episode if we'll ever talk about print and play. But one wonderful benefit and side effect of really getting into the project is that, man, it slows down your board game purchases a lot.
I can imagine.
So I think, Ricky, that you'll get a kick out of this. So one of my most recent acquisitions was I decided finally, after resisting my curiosity for a long time, to dip my toes into the 18XX genre. So
Awesome.
I picked up Shikoku 1889, which from all my research is regarded as probably the best introductory 18XX game that you can experience. And it's also not too long from what I hear. So I decided, you know what, let me give it a try. Let me introduce it to my group, and I'll put in a lot of preparation to make sure it's a good experience. And if we like it and want to try others, then great. But if we're like, this title is good enough, then all the better.
Yeah.
But I was just like, from all the research I was doing, everything I was reading about it, everyone who really enjoys really strategically deep games with lots of interaction and so much to think about, it just seemed like 18XX for me was kind of an inevitable genre that I wanted to get into. And then the second one is also, I would say, probably regarded as one of those OG old German style games. It's called Newland. I believe this is 2004, 2006. This is, from what I've read, I haven't played it yet, but I did do a little bit of a print and play project for this. So I bought a copy, but the building tiles I thought were really difficult to parse and see on the board. So I redesigned and built my own. This is kind of a very brain burnery logistics supply chain research conversion type of game. So I think the best analogy I can come up with is imagine a Uwe Rosenberg research converter where you can do a lot of really mean blocking. So I think that's how I've heard it described.
I'm looking at pictures now. It's basically, it looks like Catan, the board, but I'm sure it plays nothing like it. But yeah, I can see the different resource conversions on it. Looks kind of like a mix of maybe Catan and Keyflower from just looking at it. Obviously, I don't know how it plays. But yeah, as for 18xx, I would love to be in your position. It's a game genre I would love to dip my toe in. I need to get the group to play them. But I'm curious to, have you played it yet, or are you planning to play it yet?
I'm not sure if I'm going to introduce this to my group yet. In fact, I'm almost wondering if I'm going to need to specifically seek out a group of like 18xs curious people to try it.
Sure.
I do have a feeling that it might be a step too far even for the group that I play with, who can handle, challenging games. But I probably for starts, I know there's some website where you can play 18xx games. I might try to see if I can get into a beginner game for that, just like to understand how it flows and works so I can teach it better.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very curious to hear when you do get around to that, how it goes. I've not really had any acquisitions apart from Botanicus, which was really a gift for someone, but I did purchase that myself. So it's not on my own shelf. So nothing for me. It's been a really, really barren spell of gaming. I've not been able to get much to the table. So I've been really excited to get the games that I already own to the table. So I've got a lot of gaming ahead of me. I have managed to get a few other recent plays in of games that I've talked about before, sort of the staples on my shelf, which I've enjoyed. And I'm enjoying just revisiting my current shelf, and then hopefully we'll get some more in. But I'm in no rush right now since I've not really had the time to play. And I don't want to get a game that sits on the shelf for quite a while. So that's me with acquisitions. What about culls? Anything that you've got rid of?
Actually, it's sitting wrapped up in a box on a table upstairs. So I don't know, I want to say about a month ago, I kind of mentioned earlier that I've always been in this search ever since Tigris and Euphrates and Babylonia. I've kind of just been on a hunt for like that perfect interactive shared space tile layer from Reiner Knizia, and I just haven't quite been able to find it. So the next game in that search was Blue Lagoon. So if you see the cover of this game, it definitely evokes vibes of Moana, that Polynesian Pacific theme. I definitely picked up this game with a few nagging concerns. Number one, that I just thought it might be too light. Now, again, I'm never one to disparage a game for simple rules but deep play. But even for me, this one, after my first play, I was just like, I think this is just too light.
Yeah.
So after my first play, I was like, I think even after maybe 3-4 plays, you would see everything that there is to see in the game, at least for me. And yeah, I mean, it was for sure, it was interactive and interesting, but I think I would probably get bored of it very quickly. And I have another game in my collection already called Terra Nova from 2006.
Yeah.
I don't know, if for this style of multiplayer abstract game, I would go to Terra Nova 10 times out of 10 over Blue Lagoon. So it was an easy call.
Well, as soon as you mentioned this and I had a look, I couldn't remember what game it was, but I was like, I'm sure there was a game in your top 25 that did something like this that I'm sure you like better anyway. I'm with you with Reiner Knizia. I'm yet to find the game of his that I really love. I haven't played many, but yeah, I know what you mean. They do seem a little dry. I don't know if dry is the right word because I don't mind dry games. I'm not sure what it is, and it feels a bit like blasphemy because of how well regarded he is. But I feel as though I need to try a few more before I come up with my own opinion. But I am with you on that.
It's funny too, especially coming from me, because I'm also a big fan of abstract games.
Yeah,
so
true. Yeah,
I might be sounding a little hypocritical. I don't know. There's just something about some of his games that I played that just, I don't know, they don't quite do it for me.
yeah. Well, for me, I've got one on the coal pile, which is a game called Arctic Scavengers. This is an older deck builder that came out, I want to say like 2013, something like that. I did get it back in the summer, so that is a if you want to count that as a recent acquisition, it is. But yeah, it's quite a fast turnaround. I played it twice, and it really fell flat. I was really expecting it because, as listeners might know, I'm a big Dominion fan, and this uses a similar layout as Dominion, where you've got your 8 or 9. I can't remember how many it is. Might be 10 in this game, or 8 cards that you build your deck with. But then it has this cool mechanic where you are, can't remember what the term is, but at the end of each round there's this action phase where you basically fight against your opponents, and the cards that you don't play you're holding back, and they have like a military power on them. I'm butchering all the terms in the game. It's a bit like Dune Imperium in that regard, in that the cards that you hold back at the end of the round allow you to buy new cards. But in this case, it's fighting for these special resources, basically. There's a deck of, I think it's like 14 cards that are basically contested resources, and they're really powerful cards, but you have to fight to get them, and whoever's got the most firepower wins the card. There's victory conditions like whoever's got the most buildings, whoever's got the most people in their camp, whoever's got the most, and so on, basically. And I thought it would be a really cool, more interactive spin on Dominion, but for some reason it just really fell flat. And I think part of it is that it comes with these 2 expansions in the box. So the base game's quite bare. I think you only use, I've not played with the base game because I've got the definitive edition, whatever it's called. But in the base game, I think you only use the same 8 cards each game as your sort of deck building cards. So there's really not much variation there. But then in the expansions, it adds buildings and it adds some extra cards that you play with. But it really does struggle to tell you how to lay the cards out. There's different modules in the game, and it's like, with this game, use this deck, and with this deck, and I found it really difficult to know what to play with. But even as I was playing, I thought there's not really going to be much variation from game to game. There's like maybe 5 different cards that I haven't used. And, Dominion's renowned for having, millions of different setups. Even in the base game, you've got 25 different kingdom cards. I know we've talked before about replayability in terms of there being loads of stuff, or, mastering a game. I just feel as though this didn't really have much of either. And it was a real shame because watching reviews, this is one where I thought, I'm really going to like this. And I know Shut Up and Sit Down raved about this game. And yeah, it didn't do it for me. So that one's going on the coal pile. I know I've only played it twice, but yeah, it just didn't. I've no real desire to give it another shot. So shame, but that one is going.
Sometimes that's all it takes is 1 or 2 plays, and you can just see that it's just not gonna do it for you anymore.
Is what it is. But yeah, shall we get on to our main topic of the episode?
Let's do it.
Okay, so today we are talking about the teach. So why does the teach matter? Why is the teach important when it comes to board games? Jamie, why don't you kick us off?
So this might sound obvious, but the teach is extremely important, especially when you're introducing a game to your friends or a group for the very first time. Because as I mentioned, this is everyone's first exposure to the game. So that teach, that first play experience really is crucial to deciding the impressions and how people are going to feel about the game afterwards. And maybe, Ricky, you can share some of your thoughts as well, why it matters more than people think.
I mean, I think anyone that's maybe been in the hobby for a while starts to realize just how much it matters. And I'm sure we've all been there where a game that we've been really excited to play or to show to someone has fallen flat, maybe because I know in the past when I was first getting into the hobby, I wasn't prepared for the teach, and that really, it meant that people just were immediately turned off because, the teach is kind of marketing for the game. If you don't get the teach right, it's going to be very difficult to get those people back on board for another game if it's something that you really want them to experience.
I think another thing is, and it's almost like an axiom in life for anyone that has encountered games, which is most people, if not everyone, enjoys playing games, but rarely do people enjoy learning games.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this paradox or this contradiction where people want to play games, but they don't want to go through the process of learning games. And it's like it's a mandatory step. So how can you make that step as streamlined, as simple, as fast and effective as possible?
Yeah, I think as hobby enthusiasts, it can be easy to forget that a lot of people aren't willing to learn loads of games, and it might not affect people like us as much. So that needs to be taken into account as well.
Absolutely. And how a game is introduced and presented, it really colors the table's impression and bias towards the game. Like even to this day, I can think about bad first teaches that I've experienced and how even to this day, several years later, I just like don't have any interest in re-engaging with that game, with that particular game.
I mean, everyone knows there's always going to be a learning game, and I think that is important for the most part. Some games don't require it as much as others, but, depending on the complexity, how the winning conditions are presented, that type of thing, you're going to have to sometimes be like, well, look, this is a learning game. But I think games are most fun when all the players know what they're doing, they know how to play, they also know how to win, and they feel as they've got a shot at winning. No one really, I don't think, is going to get the most out of a game if they know that they're not in it to at least contend.
I'm not sure if I completely agree with that point, mainly because I think, and of course, I think it depends on the weight of the game. Like if, for example, again, as you mentioned, if we're talking about, I think you mentioned like a game maybe like Botanicus, where probably in 10, 15 minutes, you can figure out everything you know to play it well, then I would agree with you. But I think maybe there are some games on the heavier end where maybe your teach takes 15 to 30 minutes or maybe 30 to 40 minutes, and there's just a lot of details, a lot of things to keep track of. Then I think you're squarely in learning game territory where the point is pull levers, see what happens. I don't think anyone should be worrying too much about winning or losing.
Oh, no, yeah, I agree with that point. I'm talking about maybe 2 or 3 games in for those types of games.
I see what you mean. Okay.
When you're playing a heavier game, absolutely, you can't be worrying about winning for the first game. In fact, I think a game that has, a lot of complexity and depth, it should reveal more and more to you each time you play anyway, and you should be learning new ways of potentially pulling these levers as you play. So yeah, you can't expect to be winning or getting the most out of it on the first play.
Ricky, when it comes to like a bad teach, are there any other things that come to mind for you?
There's a few different parts to a bad teach, because I think a bad teach, you can teach how a game works, but without teaching that why is where players can maybe become disengaged or not really sure what they're doing. I think players need to know why they're doing something, not just how mechanics works. You can sit down and be like, it's worker placement, you put your worker here, you do this, but it's like, yeah, but why? Why am I doing this? And I think, flipping it onto what a good teach entails, I think a good teach perhaps starts with why are we all doing this? Because players need to know what the end goal is, and a bad teach can sometimes maybe not include that, and that leaves some players lost or feeling like they didn't get the game, or they didn't feel as though that they were taught properly. And I think we've had those conversations before, perhaps in games where it's been like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, and maybe that was them not listening, but sometimes it can be because you didn't explain it well enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe this is almost more like, the tail end of our discussion, like with the Wildcard segment, where we can talk about like, bad teaches that we've experienced. But I think that just goes to show is when you experience a game with a bad teach, it just sticks with you.
Yes, definitely.
And just to transition towards some of our thoughts about how you can teach games better, how you can make the first time experience better and more enjoyable. But I think before you even do that, I think the most important question to start off with, and this is something I've really thought about a lot maybe in the past year or two, is should you even be teaching the group this game in the first place?
Yeah.
And the reason this question is so important is because teaching a game is way easier when the group can actually handle the game.
Absolutely.
When they have all the prerequisite understanding and concepts, the experience. It's such a different experience than when you're teaching a game to maybe newbies, non-gamers, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not just a matter of whether the group can handle the complexity of the game. It's like whether they want to. I can cite a very specific example about this. So, for example, I just mentioned that one of my recent plays was CC Bonanza. And with my regular group, I introduced this to them and we had an awesome first play. Everyone got it. And it was just like, boom, we were right into it after about 2 or 3 turns. On the other hand, I sometimes, every once in a while, I'll play with this couple who I would say I would definitely qualify. If not non-gamers, very like new into playing
Yeah.
games. So almost everything that I introduce to them initially, even when I think it's like they should be able to hand it, they're like, "Oh, this is complicated. This is like so many rules."
Mm.
And I had such a headache trying to teach CC Bonanza to them. So that just resonated in my mind. I'm like, they weren't ready for this.
I agree. I think I'm quite careful when I talk about gaming and playing with certain players and using the term, oh, they can't handle that weight or complexity of game. And it's like, well, of course they probably can. I'm not more intelligent than them, but in terms of the desire to, or the wanting to internalize these rules and actually get enjoyment out of that, that's the difference. And I think, yeah, you're right. It's not necessarily whether they can handle it, but whether they want to. And just because they're clever doesn't mean they want to, play an 18xx game or whatever. So yeah, that is important. And I think keeping your group in mind for the game that you're teaching is definitely an important thing that you need to do if you want it to go well.
And I think like a corollary of this is, will they be receptive to it? So kind of what I mentioned is like, if I dumped my big Cloud Spire box in front of them, or Mage Knight, it would probably spook a lot of people.
Yeah.
So there really needs to be that genuine interest from the group, from the people you're playing with right out of the gates. And I think this ties pretty well into the next point, which is, okay, the first question is, should you be teaching this game in the first place? And I think the next one is timing.
Yeah.
So Ricky, I'm sure maybe you've had this experience with marathon gaming sessions or game days where you've been, for example, in my case, we've been gaming nonstop for 8-10 hours. And then at the end of that session, someone's like, do you want to play this complicated 2-3 hour game?
Yeah.
So how many times has someone tried to teach your group a heavy game late at night or at the end of a long gaming marathon? It's like that game should have been played first thing in the morning when we started.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a reason why when people talk about game nights, they often talk about, an opening game, then the main event, then a lighter game to end, because yeah, nobody wants to learn a really complex game at, midnight, 11 o'clock at night, whatever it is. So timing is very important. And again, that colors the first impression. If your only memory of this game that you might have really loved was, oh, I was tired and all these rules were coming at me, it's like, are you going to want to go back to that game? So yeah, I think that's a really important one.
So I think this kind of segues into different styles of teaching games. And without a doubt, there's multiple ways that you can effectively teach a game to people. Some people like to be very interactive, keep everyone in the group at the table involved with the teach in terms of moving pieces, actually simulating actions, or some people are very structured. They have an outline, they have a script. What do you think?
I think when we were sort of collecting our notes for this episode, one of the things that came up was, do you have to be a natural teacher to teach board games? Do you need to have a natural way of knowing how to, organize this information, how to present it to the players in a way that, works for them specifically and gets everyone up to speed? I know you mentioned in your notes, you were like, I mean, why don't you explain? Because you had a response to this.
Yeah, it was funny. I think it looked like almost the beginning of a debate in our show notes. And I see I think you made a valid counterpoint. So to your point, Ricky, yes, I do believe without a doubt, just like anything, I think there are people who are naturally talented, have natural aptitude for different skills, and teaching, of course, is one of those. There are some people who are just, I think, naturally good at organizing information from a top-down perspective. Maybe, for example, for board games.
Yeah.
I think like the worst thing you can do as a teacher is start from the bottom in the weeds and then work your way up. So I think a good board game rules play instruction is all about how you structure your teaching outline.
Yeah.
So if you do that in a very structured way, or a conversational way, or a rolling teach, I think all those different styles, as long as they're achieving that objective in a way that people can process the information in a good way. So to your point of, yes, I believe if someone is a natural teacher, then they will be better at this without preparation. But I do believe with preparation, with assistance, for example, from There are lots of wonderful teaching guides and teaching aids on Board Game Geek. You can use AI tools to give you an outline. There are a lot of different things you can do to facilitate your teach if you don't think you're a natural teacher.
Yeah, that's a fair point, because I in our show notes, my response was, but is that not what a natural teacher is, to structure your teaching outline? And I think, yeah, perhaps I'm leaning towards your side of things, actually, because even if you're not a natural teacher, you're given a lot of opportunity to teach this game. You're given a rule book, you're given, let's play videos or whatever, and perhaps maybe it's a case of being aware that maybe you aren't a natural teacher, and instead you need to use all these tools to present it in a way, is what's maybe what I'm getting at. And also the fact that, so I don't think I'm a natural teacher, but I know I'm very enthusiastic about teaching board games. So I immediately go into that role of, okay, I want to make this as good as possible. And it maybe perhaps doesn't come naturally to me, but the enthusiasm is at least natural. So maybe there's a difference there.
Exactly. And I think honestly, just taking the act of, like, if you know you're going to be in charge of teaching the games to your group during the game day or the game night, I think just the act of taking that seriously, taking the preparation seriously, you're already 50% of the way there.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think this leads to the next point, and this is, I think, will be an interesting subtopic in this topic of teaching, which is how much instruction and teaching is enough before you just start playing. So, Ricky, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, I think, as with any good question, the answer is it depends. Depends on what kind of game you're playing. And it's not just necessarily the weight or complexity of a game. I think the weight can often be misleading on Board Game Geek, for example, in terms of how much you need to teach. I don't think they necessarily go hand in hand. For example, a game could be quite light. I'm sure you could apply this to quite a few games, but a game could be quite light but come with a massive deck of cards. And in that case, each of those cards might do something slightly different. I'm not going to go through and teach each one. I'll explain it as they come up. And that, in that case, that is going to be more of a learning game, even if the game is generally maybe a lighter game than a more complex, heavy Euro or whatever we're playing. So that's a case where you just explain, okay, you might explain roughly what they all do, and then be like, as they come up, I'll explain each one so we can keep the flow going, because no one wants to sit there and be taught every single card in the game. So that's one example of making sure not to front load your instruction too much. But there's definitely the other side of the spectrum where people really need to understand the core mechanics of a game in order to know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm of two minds when it comes to this question. Obviously, I think as I've done board game instruction up to this point in my short career gaming, I would probably say I think it depends on the nature of the game, because just some games simply require more front-loaded instruction before you can begin play. Like there's, especially as you get into more mid-weight, heavier weight games, it's just sometimes like you just need to know what everything does. You need those details in order to play well. That being said, I think for example, Paul Grogan, who does, Great Gaming Rules?
Yeah.
I think it is. I think he's quite famous, as famous as you can be in the board gaming hobby when it comes to his teaching methodology, which is more of a rolling teach.
Yeah.
And I know he says that he only really uses that, for example, when he's at conventions, for example, Essen, or what's the other one in the US? I'm blanking out on it right now.
Gen Con.
Gen Con, yes, thank you. Where he'll use this type of rolling teach. And I've been really interested in that idea. I'm like, would it be possible to apply that to like a heavy game where we don't do we don't do a front-loaded teach, and maybe I have a script of the first few turns where each player is taking their actions per the script, and just by seeing the game flow over the first few turns, you can kind of get a sense, you can, in a very organic, natural way, absorb how the game works and how it plays and how the actions work. And then maybe by the time you're 50, 60, 70% through, you're autonomous and self-sufficient at playing the game. Now, I think this would take a consensus agreement at the table to play this way. But I'm very interested in this idea.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say the only pushback to that is everyone needs to be on board with that. But that is how I learned Carnegie. I think it wasn't Paul Grogan, it was John Gets Games. He does a similar thing where he just plays the game basically. And that is how I, grokked that game in the end, because just watching an explanation or reading the rule book, I couldn't really see all the things clicking together. So yeah, there's something there. And I think if a group is on board with learning that way, that's a good thing. And actually, coincidentally, my partner hates learning games. She won't play many games with me because she's not big into board gaming, but she absolutely hates learning them. So this is how we play. We'll just start. We'll set the game and I'll just start. And for some reason, that's how it works for her. She picks up games in that way, whereas I much more prefer learning everything up front or in a more controlled environment. But it clearly works for different people.
For example, this rolling teach, when I taught CC Bonanza to my group, worked beautifully. As in, pretty much the way I taught is like we just did, for example, we did a dummy round, and then pretty much everyone took a turn. And by the time every player had each taken a turn, everyone's like, okay, we got it.
Yeah.
Now that's a later game, but yeah, in any case, it's just something that I find very interesting.
Yeah.
So the next subtopic that we wanted to discuss was talking about tailoring the teach to your audience. So in that case, we mean, are they hobbyist gamers, or are we talking about new gamers or even non-gamers for that matter? So I'll start on this one. When it comes to new gamers, I think the even more important question is what games you decide to introduce or teach. So I know we touched on this previously, which is, I think, experienced veteran gamers that really we often forget what we deem as lightweight or midweight, what's simple and straightforward, really could still be perceived as very complicated, heavy, or difficult for inexperienced gamers. So I almost have a principle or an axiom, which is if I'm with people where I don't know what their gaming experience is like, when in doubt, err on the side of lighter, easier games. When in doubt, go even lighter.
When we talk about our Wildcard segment, this is going to be something that stung me in the past. Yeah, if in doubt, go even lighter is basically my mantra, really, because I've been stung by thinking, oh yeah, these guys will get this, and it's just been an absolute disaster. Not many times, luckily. I've learned from my mistakes, but that has happened. And on that note, I think you do have to really be careful about the group that you're playing with, because like you were saying about newer gamers or non-gamers, they're not going to know all the terminology that we take for granted. Like for some games, when we're playing with a gamer group, you can be like, this is worker placement, blah, blah, blah. And they already know how the game is roughly going to play out. For those non-gamers, you have to explain what worker placement is. You have to explain what card drafting is, what deck building is. All of these things are completely new mechanisms that they have to learn on top of the rules of the actual specific game. So yeah, you've really got to take that into account, I think.
I think the other thing, and you mentioned this in the notes as well, which is especially for the first play, again, I don't think the goal is to teach the game perfectly. Obviously, it feels good when you teach a game well, but really I think the goal is to ensure that everyone has a positive first experience with the game.
Mm-hmm.
However you can achieve that objective, and if you achieve that objective, then I think whatever you've done is correct.
For example, theme might be an important part in this part of the teach. If you want to try and get people involved that aren't heavy strategic gamers, maybe they need a bit more theme. For example, maybe that's not actually theme that's within the game itself. I mean, for example, a way that I sometimes teach, again, I wish I thought of an example because I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head. The way that I sometimes teach a game is I will add in extra little thematic things like, oh, we do this because this needs to happen, or this worker needs to go here because they need to have a rest, or you know what I mean? Something like that, as opposed to just this is how the round plays out. A good example of a game that I think is really great to teach for that is Viticulture, because it's quite a medium Euro, but there's so much thematic flavor there you can really lean into that when you teach. Because, for example, on the board, you go to certain spots and you draw a card or whatever, but the spots don't actually have names. But you could be like, you go to the seed shop and you grab some seeds, or you hire a builder and this guy builds something for you. So you can add in that extra thematic stuff that really helps the teach make more sense. And that is a game I think I explained when we did our top 25 episode, that is a game that I've actually had a fair bit of success with non-gamers, purely because of that, despite it being a heavier game than, pretty much any other game I'd introduce to a non-gamer.
Yeah. And I think in terms of facilitating, especially if you're playing the role as the teacher for the evening or for the game day, one thing that I've really become a huge fan of, and this also kind of plays into my dive recently into the print and play hobby, which is tools and player aids and shortcuts.
Yeah.
So for example, whether it's player aids, cheat sheets, reference cards, teaching outlines or scripts for the teach, but just having things that you can put in front of the players that they can refer to, especially for heavier games, it really makes such a difference. For example, even for my recent first play test of our variant of Sylvanian Tarek.
Yeah.
Traditionally, all you have is a deck of cards and that's it. And I'm like, there's no way this is going to be a fun experience if I'm asking everyone else at the table to have to memorize and remember what these different contracts are and how many points they get. So I literally designed an entire game board so that we could have this big visual aid that we could look at as we were playing. It makes such a difference.
That's really cool. That's something I've not really done myself. I think it's something I certainly would look into doing if there was a specific game that I thought would require it. But yeah, I think that's a really great thing to do. One thing I do though, which is it's not really the same thing, but I do often practice the teach myself, depending on the complexity of the game. If it's a lighter game, I'm quite confident I can go in and teach that. But if we're having a game day and it's a certain game that I've been waiting to play, it actually adds to the excitement of playing it, because I do enjoy teaching a game well. I get quite a kick out of it. So like I mentioned before, being excited to teach a game certainly helps, but also practicing the teach the night before or before whenever the game is a really good way of just structuring things in a way that presents itself well to a player. Because I've noticed that you don't just regurgitate the rule book. I realize when I read a rule book that I might reorganize things in a way that makes more sense to a new player in terms of why we're doing something, for example. So practicing that allows me to really focus in on that and get it in the right order.
That's a great idea. And I think a similar method that you could try, and this is something that I do more often, is after I've read the rule book a few times and I feel like in general I have a good grasp, is I'll watch a playthrough from beginning to end on YouTube.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I'll do is when the player is about to take an action, I'll pause it and I'll kind of quiz myself. I'm like, okay, what do you get when you take that action, or what happens? And I'll try to kind of use that as a active recall, just to test yourself on the different details to make sure that you understand how it works.
Yeah, and another thing which I think I think you put this down, but it definitely applies to me as well, is the guilt-free let's not continue deal when it comes to the teach.
Oh yes, yeah, this is one of my favorites. I mentioned that couple that I game with, but typically I do this with non-gamers or people that I'm just nervous that they're not going to be receptive to. Like, I don't know how they're going to receive a game. So right out of the gate, I say, okay, I'm going to give you a guilt-free, let's not continue. So I'm going to teach the game for 5-10 minutes. And then once I'm there, you decide whether you're like, you know what, I don't think this is going to be fun, or yeah, let's give it a try. And I just find that takes a lot of, especially when you've heard stories about gaming groups teaching some of these unspoken social contracts that we abide by.
Yeah.
I think sometimes feel bad about saying no, about saying, let's not do this. So I think as the teacher, as the person who's introducing the game, as much as I would like to play it, again, I think with the goal of everyone having a good experience being supreme, I think this arrangement works really well. So Yeah, I mean, I just think if after 5-10 minutes of teaching, they don't think they understand the game or they don't think they're going to enjoy it, then we can just box it up and switch to something else. And I think people feel grateful for that you're not forcing or pushing them into something.
Yeah, well, it's something that I've not actually said up front, but it's definitely something that I keep in mind. If I'm teaching a game and it's not, I can see it's maybe not clicking, I'll ask. I'll be like, "Do you want to do something else?" I might do what you do and just go up front, and because I think that's a really, like you say, a nice way of phrasing it so that the pressure is off. And ultimately, as the teacher, I want people to enjoy the game because it kind of can put a dampener on you when if you're teaching a game and people don't like it or don't have the same enthusiasm as you. So I think making sure that it's not going to ruin your experience in any way, or it's also making sure that everyone there is having a good time is really important as a teacher, I think.
I think a very common question when it comes to teaching a game and playing a game for the first time is when to correct players and when to just let them learn through play. So what is your thought on this?
I don't think I'm a very strict player anyway. Like, for example, when it comes to takebacks in a game, obviously there's a limit. I do think, if it's the next round or whatever, then sure, tough. In a learning game, I'll be more lenient. But even in not a learning game, I feel as though if a player's like, "Oh, can I take that back?" Yeah, I'm generally quite relaxed. I don't want to be the police, at the table. But to your specific point about correcting players or letting them learn through play, I think I'm more leaning to correcting players, but I also want to. You have to take each situation as it comes because you also don't want to be dictating their play and you want them to experience the game for themselves. So I try and sit back, but if I realize that they're really struggling, I might, chime in. I don't want to let them learn by suffering, for
Yeah,
example. I don't want them to have an awful time and be like, "Well, that's the game."
absolutely.
So again, it's not something that I've really specifically thought of in terms of when do I do this, when don't I? I just play it by ear. But yeah, I'd like to try and gently guide players, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally, what do they say? The bad teacher award, reward, where the teacher, you're a bad teacher if you win the game
Yeah.
because you're leveraging your understanding of the rules. Just naturally, I'm not a competitive person at all. So especially when it comes to playing games, I'm as easy going as it comes.
Yeah.
So when it
Yeah.
comes, especially because quite often when I'm teaching a game, it's my first time playing the game as well.
Yes, true.
So I feel like I'm even in more of a position to just be easygoing because I'm making mistakes. We're all making mistakes. We're all learning the game. And I just think that attitude makes it a better experience for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
Ricky, are there any games that come to mind that are a pain in the butt for you to teach?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this about games that are really hard to teach, but maybe they're not. When you know them, they're perhaps simpler in sort of gameplay and complexity. I have a few that come to mind. One of them is the one that I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, Ex Libris, which is a game that I've played twice now, and I have some pretty major problems with the game. It's worker placement. You're building a little library of cards in front of you. You're organizing stuff. There's no issues there. But the main problem with this game is that there's about 14 tiles, which are basically worker placement spots, that are revealed throughout the game. Sorry, there's more than 14. I think there's 24. So there's 24 spots that kind of come out in a random order throughout the game. And there's so much text on these tiles.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That probably could have been summed up a lot easier with shorter wording. And it just makes it I don't often glaze over in a game. My eyes don't often glaze over, but I was playing it the other day and you do get a little reference sheet of all the different tiles, but the wording and everything, I was it was not going in. And it's a light game. You're basically putting your workers down, you're swapping cards in your hand management, and then you're placing them down in front of you. I think it's weighted like a 2.2 on BGG. So, it's unanimously not a heavy game, but that was a really tough teach, and not to mention that the text is small. I mean, that's not really to do with the teach, but it certainly doesn't help with usability and learning a game. So that was a bad one. And I'll mention one other, which is a heavier game, but one that I really struggled to get to grips with, and I still don't know if I do, and that's Obsession. And this is a game that's really really popular. It's, blown up massively. I don't think it was that big when it first came out, but since it's got loads of popularity. And it's because of the theme, it's very highly thematic. It's doing, what's the word? It's kind of like an old English theme where you're running an estate and you've got different members of staff, you're building buildings. But because of this close tie into theme, this hampers the flow of the game, I think. For example, you've got different workers and they do slightly different things, but some of them can substitute for other ones. So if you don't have, like, again, I'm not going to mention the exact names because I can't remember them, but if you don't have like a butler, this guy can substitute, but he can only substitute for the butler, and this other guy can only substitute for this guy. And you do get a little play array, but it's so much little things like that. There's another rule where it's like on round 3, all these buildings move over to the side, and it's just, again, I think you can, maybe this is a commentary on compared to viticulture, where I think it really leans into the theme in the teaching sense. This is the opposite way, where it is very thematic, and I think that's what people love about it. But I've really struggled playing with it, and I still don't really know how I feel about the game purely because of that side of things.
For me, at least in my collection, I would say the one game in particular that I have by far the hardest time teaching, and this is even with a lot of forethought, writing down scripts, really thinking about it, is Matai and I.
Yeah.
Again, this is just a game with 54 cards, multi-use cards, but man, there's just something about this game that just breaks people's brains. Experienced gamer and inexperienced gamers alike. Interestingly, that couple I mentioned earlier that I play games with, I taught my guy friend in that couple, how to play. And over several sessions, I think he has slowly absorbed how to play. So we have some fun with it. But I know trying to teach his girlfriend, and she was just like, what?
Yeah.
What? It was just bouncing off it very hard. Yeah, that's just a bear of a teach. And then probably the second one is Gingopolis. So Gingopolis is definitely a bit of a Frankenstein of various mechanisms that combine in a strange way, but also in a beautiful way. Like once you play it, it just makes sense. But again, this is also one of those games I just have a hard time. You just have to play a few rounds for people to see it.
Yeah.
How the actions work. And of course, I just mentioned Bonanza. Even for me, like trying to understand some of the trading dynamics took a while to understand. So of course, teaching it is a challenge as well.
Yeah, and like Bonanza, like you said, is a lighter game, but it just has that initial learning curve that, because it's perhaps not like much else, that makes it a tricky one to teach.
So maybe just to close out this segment on teaching, we can just quickly comment on teachability as a criteria for keeping a game in your collection or culling one.
Yeah, I think this is a big factor when it comes to me purchasing games. Like we said earlier, there's even 18xx, that's a genre I'd love to get into. I've mentioned in previous episodes games like Food Chain Magnate or other spotter games I would love to play, but I don't have the group to teach it to, so they're no-go zones for me, even though I know that I would probably really enjoy getting into them. A game that I actually have and I've never taught to anyone else, but I really like, and it was on my top 25, is Mistfall, which is a game a bit like Mage Knight. You play as a character, you're doing a quest, you're going through different locations and you're doing combat, but there's loads of keywords, there's loads of different phases, there's loads of, if A happens, then B, or, lots of different factors that can influence the game, and it kind of makes it a bit of a stop-start flow, and I'm worried that won't translate well to teaching other players, even though I really enjoy that. So that's been solely a solo game for me, and I enjoy it enough solo to keep it, but I've still not taught it to anyone. So it's certainly one that maybe, if it didn't have that solo factor, it would not be in my collection.
Without a doubt, in the past, and even now to some degree, teachability is one of the biggest factors in whether I keep a game in the collection or not.
Yeah.
In fact, high teachability has been something that I really look for. It's just because I go sometimes so long in between gaming sessions where it's just fun when we can get a new game out on the table. It takes 10 minutes to learn and we just go.
Yeah, definitely.
This is a bit of a story which I think kind of plays into like a bad teaching experience. So maybe it could be a segue into our wildcard segment on just bad teaching experiences. Tigris and Euphrates.
Okay.
So I used to own this game and I loved it. I mean, I think it might have been my number one game for a time early on. I just thought this game was so cool. But my God, this game was a nightmare to teach. In particular, just because it's weird. I think especially compared to modern games and modern Euros and the type of designs that you see out there, it's just weird and different. But in particular, there was this concept of, I think it was like external wars and internal wars and how that would trigger. And no matter how I went about trying to explain it, just like people could not get it.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those games like where even if you teach it well and you explain it, people don't know what to do. Like they just don't understand the strategic considerations. And for that reason, I was just like, as much as I like this game, teaching this game is not fun. So I sold it.
Yeah. As for games that, let's say, teaching disasters or games that really didn't go down well, one for me that does spring to mind, and this is very early on in my board game career, so to speak, was Robinson Crusoe. And it's not an easy game to teach. To be honest, it was a game that I bought and I probably wasn't even ready for it myself. And this shows more about me as not being prepared as the game itself, but it isn't a very intuitive game. It's a game where you're on an island, you're trying to stockpile food, build stuff, prepare, try not to basically starve to death or get, mauled by a bear or whatever it is. But there's a lot going on. There's worker placement, and there's you're building different items, and then there's events that happen, and based on that, they get reshuffled into the deck. And I was just, at this part of my gaming life cycle, I was just so enamored by all these different things and the fact that it was all just on the table in front of me. And I went and tried to teach it to 3 other people, and it was a disaster. And I probably didn't, well, first of all, it's just not the first game that you teach someone. So that's all on me. Second of all, it's not a very easy teach anyway. It's not got a great rule book. And I wasn't really thinking, I should really try and plan this a certain way to make it an easier teach. And third of all, that was kind of when I realized that some people just aren't interested in learning a game that you might be really fascinated about. So that is one that I sold quite a long time ago, and I do think about it from time to time because I think I'd really enjoy it. And I know it's got great solo mode, but do I want to pick it up again? I don't know, and maybe that's because it's been tainted by this bad experience.
I don't know if I would call it a teaching disaster, but maybe certainly a teaching failure, or just a moment where I was halfway through a teach and I realized that I did not understand the game well enough. I did not have a good enough mastery of the rule set to continue teaching, and where I just called it. I said, you know what? I don't think I'm ready or prepared to teach this game well. So let's just call it. Let's switch to another game. So that was I think last year I was teaching Tramways, which is an Alban Viard, kind of something like Age of Steam along those lines.
Yeah.
And I was very excited, but it was just one of those things where I think I just didn't have enough time to prepare, to study the rules going into the teach. And about 5-10 minutes in, I was like, guys, let's change to another game. I don't think I'm ready for this.
There's a comment on that in terms of being prepared for a teach that actually makes it a much more enjoyable experience for you as well. I hate trying to teach, and I've been there before where I've been trying to teach a game and I don't know it well enough and I'm just stressing out myself. So one more for me, I'll just mention one more, is another game that I've sold, and that is Dead of Winter, which is a sort of semi-cooperative survival game. And I think a semi-co-op game inherently is a difficult game to teach to players that, well, anyone really, but certainly players that haven't played many games before, purely because there's certain stuff that they need to keep secret. But if they don't know that, and if they don't know how certain things work, they can give that away. And I think that game sits in an odd space. I'm not defending myself here because for a start, that was when I realized that this group really, I need to go lighter, and ever since I have, and I've had better luck. But I thought that they'd enjoy the theme, and it was like Halloween at the time or something, so I think it was that was why. But it's a game that has a lot of social aspects and a lot of kind of above the table interaction, but it's also got a lot of mechanics, and probably too many for the style of game it's trying to be. There's a lot of stuff you need to remember. There's like locations that have certain rules where you create noise, and then you're drawing cards. You've got special character abilities. You've also got your own goals, hidden goals. You're trying to contribute food to the camp, all of this stuff. And I think it would go down really well in a group that plays more games, and I've not had that experience, and I've sold it since. But yeah, that was a bit of a teaching disaster for me.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to close out this entire episode on teaching, I think this is just my feeling. The most important thing you can do going into a teach is, especially if you have this responsibility of where you'll be teaching the games to your group or your friends, is just take it seriously. Be prepared, do your homework, make sure you've studied up well. And it's not to give you undue pressure, but even for me, like this is one of the reasons why when I'm running a game day, I really try to nail down what games we're going to play so that I can do my homework and come prepared, because it just makes game day so much better for everyone when you don't have to sit there while someone's trying to teach you out of the rule book. So there's my spiel for today.
I think most people, or a lot of people perhaps like us, enjoy the teach and enjoy that. Maybe it's not just the presenting, but it's getting people to really appreciate something that you like. Like there's a lot of enjoyment that comes out of that, and that will be heightened if you are prepared. But just a note as well to close out is that those teaching disasters, I'm kind of glad I've had them as well, because it's taught me where, it's taught me a lot in terms of the group, what sort of weight I should be looking at, what sort of complexity for different people, and erring on the side of caution. So I'm glad I've had those experiences as well. And I think that means that in the future, hopefully it won't happen as much, and I'll have more positive experiences.
And I think like all of us, we run into, you kind of, especially as experienced gamers, by learning games and preparing to teach them, we also find we're able to kind of feel the wall of our own limits of what we're interested in learning and playing as well. I know for sure for me, I think there was a time where I know I was like really interested, kind of like going as heavy as possible. And I was just realizing learning and remembering and teaching these rule sets is a headache.
Yeah, definitely. When you're on the receiving end of having to learn a load of rules in maybe a short space of time, like that's when I've started to realize that maybe it's not always about maximum complexity, and it's more about just choosing a game that's right for that particular moment.
Yeah. Well, Ricky, it was a pleasure getting on the podcast with you today. I love this topic. I feel like we could have kept talking, but just for the sake of our listeners, I think this is a good time to close it out. And any closing remarks from you?
No, I mean, like you said, we could keep going for ages, but I think we touched on the main things. And ultimately, I think it's just being the role of teacher is also the role of showing people what potentially amazing experiences. And that's what I would like to get out of being a teacher. And I think that's what I strive to do, is to try and just bring more people into the hobby and enjoy what I enjoy.
Amen. All right, Ricky, it was a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to doing it again very soon.
Indeed. So thanks everyone for listening. If you did like the episode, please give us a follow on Instagram, The Tabletop Minimalist. Please get in touch. Send us any questions, any comments. We'd love to hear from our listeners and have you as part of the community.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to The Tabletop Minimalist. If you enjoyed the show, maybe leave us a review and follow us on our Instagram at The Tabletop Minimalist. You can also drop us a line at hello@thetabletopminimalist.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, so long and happy gaming.